Lacing is basically sewing across the backside of a petal with a very thin gauge wire in order to hold all of the rows together. Now, some people really hate lacing. It's a little bit tedious, it's not the most fun thing to do, and especially when you're new, it's going to hurt your hands a little bit. I don't want to scare you off from it though, I promise it is absolutely necessary. It makes a huge difference in the appearance of your flowers. So before I demonstrate how to do lacing, I'm going to show you why we need lacing. I've got here a 15-row petal, and as you can see, once they get wider, the rows start to separate like this, which is not very attractive. And then when you go to give your flower some shape, as you always should do, then of course your petals are going to split apart and it'll just look like a mess. So we're going to sew a wire straight across the center of our petal to help keep those rows in place. All right, now let's talk about how you lace. I've got a sample petal made up here. This is, well, how many rows is this? 15 rows across, round top, pointed bottom. And I've cut a 30 gauge copper core wire. It should be about 2.5 times the width of your petal, at least. And I'm going to fold that wire in half. And I'm going to insert it into the front side, not the back, into the front side of my petal with each of these wires on either side of the basic row. And I'm going to push it all the way through until that little wire catches between two beads and about the middle of the basic row. Alright, so you should have what looks like 2 wires sticking out of the back side of your petal, and we are going to cross them to make a little loop right on that basic row. Now normally I do use a color of wire that matches my beads. I'm using this color just so you can see it in the tutorial, but generally it won't show very much at all if you use a matching color of wire. So now we're going to flip to the back side of our petal, and I like to straighten these out and lay them across. And we're going to do 1/2 of the petal at a time. So we're going to take the end of our wire, and I'm going to scoot in here. Alright, and we are going to insert it between the next 2 rows over. So this is our basic row here, and then we're going to insert our petal between those next 2. And we will pull it towards the front. Now I use my thumbnail here to mark where I want my wire to go. You do want your wire to go somewhat straight across. It doesn't need to be perfect, but try to get it as close as you can. So before you start lacing the next row, kind of plan ahead where you want your wire to be and use your thumbnail to mark that spot. So when you pull your wire tight, it'll be easier to get it between the right beads. Now if you look at the front side of your petal again, we need to go around this second row. So we're going to stick our wire between the first and second rows here. We want to make a full loop around this second row. And we will pull that through. Make sure you pull nice and tight. And you'll want to check the front side to make sure that your wire went down all the way between those 2 beads. Alright, so we've got 1 row laced in, and we're going to go between the next 2. So insert your wire into the back side of your petal between those next 2 rows. And we're going to pull it all the way through. Again, use your thumbnail there to mark this spot. And then we're going to insert our wire in front of the row that we're trying to wrap around and pull it all the way through. Alright, so I'm going to have to go down a little bit. I don't have a straight way across. So I'm going to, that'll work. Okay, we're going to go right there. And end to the front again. Pull tight. I'm also pinching and holding all my rows together here with my thumb and forefinger. That just helps keep them all flat and together while I'm lacing. Just helps keep a little bit more control of the situation. I've got one more row of beads here, and I'm actually, because I'm at the edge here, I want to tie off my lacing wire so it won't just come undone. So we're going to loop around that outer edge row one more time. And then you can just take your wire clippers and cut that wire down very close. And then make sure you tuck that wire down as close as you can. You want to run your finger over the edge there to make sure that that wire isn't snagging you at all. And if it does, you need to push it down a little bit more. And then you're just going to repeat the same thing on the other side of your petal. Notice that I'm kind of straightening my wire before I make my next loop. It helps prevent kinks. This thinner wire will break a little bit more easily. Alright, so I've double wrapped that last row there, and I can cut off the end and tuck it down. And there we have finished the lacing on our petal. Now this wire should only be visible from the back. Mine is going to be a little bit more visible on the front just because I used a darker wire. But if you've used a matching color of wire, that wire should be almost invisible on the front. So now when we go to shape our petals, all of those rows will hold nicely together. You might need to do a little bit of molding, but they will stay together. They're not going to separate and pull apart. So you get a more solid looking petal. Okay, now that I've shown you the basics of how to lace, I want to show you another lacing technique called lace as you go. Now basically, lace as you go means that you're going to be lacing your petal or leaf while you're making it instead of after. Now this is going to be especially helpful for leaves and petals that are really long or really wide, but some people do choose to do this with everything that they make. Alright, so what I like to do is I like to go ahead and make the first 3 rows of beads before I insert my wire. Now, this isn't always possible. If you're working with something really long, then you may need to add them on the basic row before you add any other rows of beads. But if you can, go ahead and put those first 3 rows in there. And then you're going to take your 30 gauge lacing wire, fold it in half just as you normally would with the lacing wire, and we're going to insert it into our basic frame just as you would a regular lacing wire, with 1 wire on each side of the basic row. And then pull that wire all the way through to catch between 2 beads, cross the wires over the back, and then you're going to add in those 2 rows of beads that we've already done. Alright, so now we have our little frame set up. We've got our lacing wires ready to go, and from now on we're going to lace each row in as we add it in. I'm going to bring more beads down onto my working wire, and I'm going to position them right beside that first row. And then before I even wrap my row, I'm going to go ahead and lace the row in. And I'm holding this new row tight between the row previous, just to keep and hold it in place. And then I'm going to wrap it in. And then that row is nice and held snug in place so that I can measure out beads I need for my top wire. And I'm going to do the other thing, or the same thing on the other side. I'm going to come down the side. I'm going to hold the tension on those beads and hold the row tight beside the other one. Lace it in. Wrap to the bottom. Now if you're working with something short, this one is pretty short here, so you can actually measure out the full row and wrap with the top wire and then go back and lace it. But that's really only going to work with shorter pieces. So if you're working with something long, you will definitely want to lace midway in the row. And you may have multiple laces you go. So you'll have a really long blade leaf with 4 or 5 different lacing wires at a time. And you will stop at every single lacing wire, lace in the row until it reaches that point, and then go up to the next lacing wire. So again, for shorter ones, you can just mold that row around as you normally would, wrap at the top wire, and then lace it in. Or you can hold midway, lace it in, and then wrap. But again, you will still want to, when you're ending off your piece, you'll still want to double wrap on the last row. And then you can cut those wires off, just like normal. And then our lacing is done, our petal is done, and that is how you lace as you go.